He can share his screen when he is ready, and we will listen to his amazing story.
And we are recording, so Lex, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Lauren. So you know by now, my name is Lex. Actually, that's short for Alexander Silbiger, and I taught for many years music at Duke University, and now I'm blissfully retired. I'm glad you could all join us today. I'm sure you all remember how a few years ago, during early 2020, around March, all our lives unexpectedly changed. Now, today, I want to tell you about another time, many years ago, when my familiar and comfortable world changed almost overnight into a place full of danger, fear, and uncertainty. Many people lost their lives, and the lives of those who survived would never be the same. It was during those days that I had an extraordinary adventure, which took me far from my home, which lasted a long time, taking over a good chunk of my childhood, and it was very scary. But this adventure saved my life. So let me begin at the beginning. And at this point, I want to share my screen so you can watch my slideshow. So you need to be patient for a moment.
And everyone, if you have a question for Lex, feel free to type it in the chat. Once he is finished with his presentation, we will go through the questions.
So do you all now see the title of my talk here, My Great Escape? And the background, there's a map, and you'll more about that soon. I was born in 1935 in the Netherlands, also known as Holland, a small country adjacent to Germany, its big neighbor. The people of Holland are called Dutch, and that's also what the language is called. Now, here's a picture of my family. My parents celebrating a wedding anniversary, my older brother, Herman, whom I called Hermie, and that's me before I grew my beard. A few days before my 5th birthday, the German army invaded my country. I well remember the morning of the invasion. I was awakened by loud banging noises and went to the window to see what was going on. Against the bright blue spring sky, I saw plumes of smoke. The German army was making a surprise assault on my city, The Hague, which was the seat of Holland's government. A few days later, in the midst of my 5th birthday party, sirens went off signaling an air raid, and we had to rush to the improvised shelter in a basement while donning gas masks, kind of yucky rubber things. An attack from the air, during which at any moment a bomb may drop and explode your entire world, is a frightening experience like no other. To this very day, my heart skips a beat when I hear sirens go off, and I relive it whenever I hear about a city being bombed from the air. My heart goes out to its people. The day after the air raid, Holland capitulated, its small army being no match for the powerful German war machine, and soon their troops marched through our streets. The German occupation came as a shock. Holland had remained neutral during the First World War, and in fact had not seen foreign armies on its soil since the time of Napoleon in the early 1800s. Although barely more than 1% of the population of Holland was Jewish, for Holland's Jews, like my family, the Southern German presence in Holland was the cause of much anxiety. At first, the life of Jews under the occupation, while not pleasant, did not appear to be life-threatening. This lulled many people into a false sense of security. Maybe it was not going to be so bad after all. Maybe it was just a matter of sitting things out for a short while until the British and American forces would come and kick the Germans out. To be sure, there were rumors of the brutal mistreatment of Jews in Eastern Europe, but people could not imagine that happening in Holland. Jews had lived in Holland for many centuries. They had made important contributions to Holland's economy and culture, and had become a greatly valued part of the population. The Dutch people would never let their fellow citizens be mistreated in this manner. No one could begin to conceive the eventual goal of the Nazis, the Germans, to extinguish the life of every Jew in Holland. To achieve this goal, the Germans first had to identify who was a Jew. Not easy, because as also happens in the US, Jews had begun to blend in with the non-Jewish population. As a first step, everyone in the country was required to register and state their religion, which seemed innocent enough. Jews received a big fat J stamped on their ID card. After that, but if you were stopped in the streets without your ID, you were in big trouble. After that, they introduced a series of increasingly restrictive measures on Jewish social lives, a new one almost every week. Jews were not permitted to go to movies, theaters, concerts, sport venues, libraries, restaurants, cafes, beaches, swimming pools, and public parks. Everywhere you saw those signs reading, "No Jews allowed." In Dutch, it rhymes, "voor Joden verboden." The first restriction that affected me personally was that Jewish children were banned from public education. When I was 6 and ready to start school, I could not go to the neighborhood school where all my non-Jewish friends went. Instead, I had to take a streetcar by myself to the other end of town where a Jewish private school had been organized. Further decrees included restrictions on movement. Jews could no longer own cars or even bicycles. They were banned from trains and eventually from all public transportation. The last major decree was that every Jew, children included, had to wear a cloth yellow star sewn onto their clothes over their hearts, with the word Jew in a kind of fake Hebrew script. All these measures aimed to isolate the Jews from the rest of the population and humiliate them, to make them appear different and inferior, almost subhuman. This method, by the way, was constantly modeled on the American Jim Crow laws. The Nazis hoped thus to minimize Dutch resistance, moving to the final phase of their plan, which was initiated in the summer of 1942 and largely completed by next spring, when Holland could be declared Judenrein, that is, cleansed of Jews. The extermination took place not in Holland itself, but in regions of East Europe, where there had always existed less solidarity with the Jewish population. The Dutch Jews were deported there under the pretext that they were merely being transported to work camps. They were first taken to Westerbork, a holding camp in the east of the country near the German border. Here you see them waiting in Amsterdam for their transport. And here you see them in that camp. From Westerbork, each week, a specially constructed train transported 1,000 Jews to Auschwitz in Poland. A 2-day journey during which they were squeezed in a padlocked car without food, water, or facilities. Upon their arrival, the old people and young children were sent straight to the gas chambers, while the others, after having a number branded on their forearms, were worked to death in slave labor or subjected to the unspeakable horrors of medical experiments. Many Jews tried to avoid deportation by going into hiding behind walls, like Anne Frank and her family, who you might have heard about, in closets, under floorboards, on farms, in barns, and all kinds of other places. This was not only uncomfortable, but also risky. Many of these underdrivers, as they were called in Holland, were betrayed. A much smaller number of Jews, only a trickle, attempted to escape altogether from Nazi-controlled territory, which required crossing several well-guarded borders and passing through other German-controlled territories. It was possibly more dangerous and surely more difficult than going into hiding. But among those who did decide to take the risk were the members of my family. Early in 1942, my parents began to realize that in spite of the Germans' effort to hide their ultimate intentions, things looked bad for the Jews in Holland. It would be best to try to leave, no matter how risky. Secretly, they began preparing for escape, not telling their closest friends and family, not even their children, of their plan. In the early morning of 13 April 1942, my mother woke me up and told me to hurry and get ready for a little trip to the country. I was taken by surprise because I had not been told anything about this beforehand, and because of the restrictions, we had not been able to travel anywhere. I became even more surprised when we did not return home that evening, but sneaked across the border to Belgium. Now here's a map. This little thing here is Holland, the Netherlands, next to Germany. And here is Belgium. Once we arrived there, I learned that we would not be going back home at all until the Germans were gone from Holland. Suddenly, and without preparation, I was cut off from all my friends, my toys, my books, and everything else I owned except for a few clothes. I was also separated from my earlier identity, since I acquired a new family name, a new nationality, and a new religion. On the continuation of our journey, we hoped to pass as Christian tourists from Belgium, and I was warned not to tell anyone my real family name or to mention that I was Jewish, because that would endanger the whole family. My parents did not have a clear idea where we would ultimately go. In their planning, they had focused on how to get out of occupied Holland, and not yet worried about the second big problem, finding a place that would grant us asylum. They had started heading south to Belgium because that was the only feasible escape route. East of the Netherlands lay Germany itself, and north and west was the sea, with a heavily patrolled coastline to defend against possible invasions from England and the US. And by the way, on this map, you see that purple line that is sort of the limit of German control. They hoped eventually to reach some territory not under German rule, perhaps Switzerland or Spain or Portugal. So these kind of brown-gray areas were neutral. But there was no internet to help them map out their journey. Instead, they had to rely on various contacts provided by the underground resistance, with which my father had had connections back in Holland. The resistance network was spotty and not necessarily trustworthy. Often payment was demanded for their services, and occasionally they obtained additional payment by betraying you to the Gestapo, the German police. But my folks had no alternative. From Belgium, we moved to France, where we changed our name once again, and I was given even stricter rules. I was not to speak in public, since the only language I knew at the time was Dutch, and that might betray us. I was warned not to make friends with anyone my age, and during the entire journey, which lasted almost a year, I would not be attending school. When we reached Paris, my parents learned that their local contact had just been arrested, and we were stuck. We had to remain there for some 6 weeks while my parents searched for someone else to help us move on. After they finally succeeded in finding such a person, we proceeded towards the most difficult part of our route, the crossing of the demarcation line. Just a sec. This was the border between northern France, which was under German occupation, and the southern zone, which at that time was still nominally independent, although ruled by a German-installed puppet government headquartered in the town of Vichy. While the earlier borders we had crossed had been guarded comparatively lightly, separating, since the Germans controlled both sides of the this boundary, it's this line here, this boundary was heavily guarded, and it required the services of an experienced passeur, as they were called, or coyote. Our crossing was, in fact, not unlike that of illegal immigrants at the US-Mexican border, involving running through fields in sparsely populated areas, crawling under barbed wire fences, and finally, crossing a river in a little rowboat. So this is where we crossed. After reaching the other side, our passeur took us to a small hotel in the nearby village of Saint-Coin, where the local police chief, apparently tipped off by him, came to arrest us. We were, after all, illegal aliens, lacking valid documents or permits to enter the country. My parents explained our situation, assured them that they would be able to obtain the necessary documents from the Dutch government officials who were in exile in England, in London. Besides, if they were thrown in jail, who would take care of the 2 young children? They apparently succeeded in persuading him not to separate the parents from the children. He told them, well, they could stay in the hotel, but they would have to remain there until those documents arrived. Now, here are a few pictures of us from this village. The first pictures I have from our journey. Here I am with my brother and my father, and here with my mother. Here I'm playing border guard. I've been sort of become obsessed by borders. This is the hotel we stayed, and if you look very carefully, you may not be able to see it. This is me, and this is my brother. Actually, that hostel still exists. You can find it on the internet. You can actually book a room there. It took another 4 months to obtain the necessary documents that would allow us to leave France, a time of growing apprehension for my parents. Jews were beginning to be deported even from unoccupied France, and the Germans could decide any moment to occupy the rest of France, which in fact they did only 2 weeks after we managed to get out. A representative of the Dutch government was able to provide us with identity papers, and here's one for my mother, but could not get us a permit to enter Spain unless we had a way to move on there, from there. The Spanish, you may, if you look this very carefully, you see that the religion there is listed as Protestant. The Spanish government did not want Jewish refugees to stay in our country, but most other countries were not keen on taking them. The Dutch government in London hoped, however, that they might find a hospitable asylum in one of their few small colonies on the other side of the Atlantic. And after several months, they were able to arrange for us and a number of other Dutch refugees to get on a Spanish ship that was to sail to Suriname on the northeast coast of South America. We finally were able to cross the border into Spain. And after a short stay in Madrid, we traveled to the port of Vigo to board our ship, the Marqués de Comillas, for the Atlantic crossing. And here is a picture of the ship, which had at one point been a luxury cruising ship, but here now it became a ship for refugees. Before we left, we learned, however, that the governor of Suriname, over whom the Dutch government had really little control, decided he would not admit the Jewish refugees, even if they were Dutch citizens. He claimed he was afraid they might become a burden to the community. There might be troublemakers, even maybe spies among us. Other Dutch colonies in the Caribbean, like Aruba and Curacao, did not want us either. And in those days, countries like the United States or Canada were certainly not welcoming boatloads of Jewish refugees. Finally, the island of Jamaica, a British colony at the time, agreed to take us on. So here you see our crossing of the Atlantic. And after passing near Trinidad, we ended up in Jamaica. In Jamaica, we were not given total freedom, but were detained in a refugee camp some distance from Kingston, the island's capital. The camp consisted of a cluster of wooden barracks surrounded by barbed wire fences. You could see 2 rows of them. With other Spartan accommodations, bunk beds, wooden flaps instead of windows, and communal bathrooms in a separate structure. Here's a picture of it in front of our room. Just get a glimpse of my mother in the corner. Here you can see the whole family, my mother, father, brother, me, and some other fellow refugees and friends. Here you see me going past a guardhouse. This is me right in the middle. You could leave the camp during the day with a pass, but you had to return at night unless you had obtained a special permit for an overnight absence. The Dutch refugees could only leave the camp permanently if another country would accept them. Now, conditions may not be so much worse than in a summer camp, except you were forced to stay there for an indefinite length of time, perhaps several years. On the other hand, our lives were no longer in danger, and for that we were grateful. I did not have such a bad time. There were a lot of other children to play with, and the tropical weather in Jamaica was beautiful every day. But the enforced leisure became frustrating for the adults, and my parents were relieved when after 3 months, they were the first refugees who could bid Jamaica farewell. The Caribbean island of Curacao decided to welcome us after all, because my father's engineering skills were needed for work on their harbor. So, after approximately a full year after we left Holland, we were able to return to a more or less a normal life, and I could resume my schooling, which I'd missed all this time. 2 years later, Germany was defeated and the war had ended. After a few months, we were able to return to Holland. But the Holland to which we came back was not the Holland we had left a few years earlier. Our house in The Hague, while still standing, was reduced to an empty shell with every fixture removed. But that could be fixed up, but some tragic news awaited us. After having been uncertain of the fate of my mother's parents, all this time we learned that they had been carried off to Auschwitz in Poland and murdered with poison gas. Discovering what happened to them, I began to realize what would have been my fate had we not left in 1942. My grandparents lived only a few blocks from us, and in all likelihood, we would have been also taken to Westerbork later that year, and from there, the horrific train ride to Auschwitz. Only a small number of able-bodied adults made it through the war, but children and old people did not stand a chance. Like my grandparents, I would not have survived the year, Here's a list of the Jewish children born in 1935, the year in which I was born, and in the same city of Rotterdam. It doesn't matter, you probably can't read this, but that doesn't matter. You see the number. All were murdered in the 7th or 8th years in the camp of Auschwitz or Silbiger. And my name would have been on that list. I understand then that I owe my life to the extraordinary courage and resourcefulness of my parents. At first, my parents tried to resume their pre-war life best they could. And a few years after our return, I celebrated my bar mitzvah, the Jewish confirmation ceremony. Eventually, my folks, like many other surviving Dutch Jews, they felt they no longer wanted to live in Holland, with so many people that they had cared about missing, and they decided to return back to Curacao. After finishing high school there, I came to America to go to college, and eventually I decided to become a citizen. In 1984, I moved to Durham and to take a position in the Duke Music Department. In the years following the war, I rarely thought about my escape experience. It happened so long ago, during my early childhood, it had no bearing on my present life. My parents almost never talked about it, and few of my friends were even aware of this part of my past. The Nazi persecution of European Jews was an ugly part of our history, but fortunately, it was now behind us. People had learned the horrible consequences of unchecked and racial religious hatred. They vowed, never again. But in recent years, I began to realize it was happening again and again and again in Rwanda, Bosnia, Sudan, Myanmar, on and on. And now the virus of anti-Semitism and other ethnic hatreds has begun to spread even in Western Europe and the United States. Think of the many recent manifestations, for example, the harassing and spitting on Asian Americans, falsely blaming them for the COVID-19 outbreak, and occasionally escalating to murderous aggression. I decided that as a member of the last surviving generation who witnessed the Holocaust, I must out myself and tell my story. I joined the Holocaust Speakers Bureau and began visiting schools and community groups, first in person, and after the pandemic outbreaks, also online. I reminded my audiences that what I experienced as a child is being experienced right now as we speak, often in a much worse way, by thousands and thousands who are desperately fleeing from the horrors of war, persecution, and starvation, who are searching for a place where they can go and rebuild their lives. Maybe think of them as not like us. They come from remote places, sometimes speak with strange accents, some dress oddly and don't look like we do, but that's only a thin skin. Under that skin, they're no different. They're Syrians, Afghans, and Ukrainians trying to make their way across Europe, and Central Americans walking thousands of miles, carrying their children on their backs. They are us. We must remember what happened to the Jews of Europe 80 years ago and open our doors and hearts to these desperate refugees. And we must never stop fighting that virus of hate whenever and wherever it arises, so we don't become complicit in persecuting victims. Thank you for listening, and I will be happy to answer questions you may have.
Thank you, Lex. If anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we will go through them.
Looking for the chats. Where are they? Here.
Well, I have a question. I didn't type it in, but I just was curious.
Sure.
When you mentioned how you got to France and your parents' contacts there had been taken, and they had to find a different way for you to keep moving forward. Do you have any idea how they found out who they could actually trust once they were there?
That was a tricky thing and a very good question. Basically, they were familiar with the resistance in the Netherlands. And they had these resistance was kind of a network, a loose network was never. And so they would tell us, go to the next place we go to, and maybe this was only in Belgium, this person you can trust. It was always a risk. And then in Belgium, that person would tell us the next contact, say in Paris. So there was this kind of chain of people who we followed.
And Lee has put in the chat an interview that was in the North Carolina Council for the Holocaust newsletter. So if any of you would like to read that, the link to that is in the chat as well.
Right. Now, there may be another question you wonder about, and that is, how did we manage to sustain ourselves that long time in these occupied zones, since, there were no such things, of course, as credit cards and ATMs, and Dutch money would have betrayed us. So what did we live on? Because after all, every night we had to stay in either a hotel or a boarding house, and all the meals we had to eat in restaurants. Well, here's the answer. My father's father, my grandfather, had been a diamond merchant. Many Jews in Europe were diamond merchants because it was one of the few professions they were allowed to do. And even in America, the diamond industry has a lot of Jews working there. Now, my father was an engineer, but like most of us, he knew a lot about his father's profession. And one of the things he knew is how to deal with diamonds, that is, how to buy and sell them. And so the next thing was taking diamonds along and sell them when we needed money. But how to smuggle them. And that's now I'm going to show you the one artifact that I still have from that period that my father gave me. And my parents, needless to say, passed away a long time ago. But my father had a pipe. He was a pipe smoker. And he had a special pipe known as called a bulldog. And I have it here. And you see it's kind of thick here. And he had hollowed it out. And in it, he would put diamonds, which after all take very little room. And he was able to smoke the pipe, even with the diamonds in it. And so he would open it and take the diamonds out. And on the way, if he needed money, he would sell them. So that's an answer of that question. So are there any other questions? This is your chance.
I have another question. The picture that you have of you at the border, and you say you're playing the border guard there. Did your parents kind of make this more like an adventure for you and your brother to try to, keep you from some of the bad that was happening, or?
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I would not say they deliberately made it into like a fun adventure. In fact, we knew what was the danger, what was going on. We had to know this, even young as we were. And I had my 7th birthday in Paris, so I was, 6 or 7 years old. But because of the danger, they wanted to make sure that me and my brother knew what could happen if we were not careful. Nevertheless, and this was the amazing thing of my parents, I think, they did try to act as tourists. And when we were in Paris, and we had to stay about 6 or 7 weeks in Paris, we went around looking at the sights. We went to see the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower and all these things that people do in Paris. So nobody would suspect us. After all, we were in boarding house, and there were even German soldiers stationed, and they just accepted us. And that's maybe another, if it's the time, I'll tell you another little anecdote there. And there was kind of like a social room, lounge, and a German soldier there saw me, a little kid there, and he had a bar of chocolate, had been kind of scarce, and he wanted to offer me chocolate. But well, for one thing, I was brought up like most 6 years old, still today, you don't accept candies from strangers. And besides, he was a German soldier, so he said, no, 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 no. And my parents were worried, and they were just hoping I would accept it because, they thought of my betrayers. But I think the soldiers have thought, oh, well, it's just a shy kid, and didn't think anything of it. So that was the thing. But my parents really, they were pretty cool, I have to say, that they were able to keep this up. I'm not sure if I could have done it. Anything else?
All right, I don't see any more questions, but I'm gonna do a little bit of housekeeping, and if you think of a question, you want to drop it in the chat real quick. So again, thank you everybody who was able to attend tonight. We are recording this, so you will have access to it. We also will send out an evaluation in the next few days. So we've taken attendance to see who all is here. We'll send an evaluation, and we would love for you to fill that out for us. And then once that is done, you will get a certificate of attendance that you can use for CEUs, specifically if you're in your renewal year. We do have 2 questions that have been put in. So first is, what do you think is the most important thing for our young people to hear from you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, that are you all that shy like these little kids were? Okay, yeah. The most important thing for young people to hear from me is, in fact, to understand what it is like to be a refugee and what it is like to suffer from discrimination and to fight it, to not allow it, even if it's just like a joke about a Black person, a Latino person, because sometimes these things start with jokes and they get more serious. I actually prepared a handout. I don't know whether you got it, where I mentioned some of those points. Now let's see, I have some more other questions. Did your brother come to the United States? The answer is yes, he did. We both came, and what happened is we both came here and to study, and then our parents eventually decided, since it didn't look like we were going to come back home, they came to the United States. And what is this? Just curious, what led you to studying music? Well, I think anybody who's studied music can tell that it's almost like an addiction. If music can become such a passion, so important, that you really want to devote your life to it, and to be, and if you have full disclosure, originally I did not study music, and my parents did not think it was a good idea, not a proper thing for a young man to study music, because what are you going to do with music? Are you going to, play in nightclubs or something? So I studied science, which actually I was quite interested in. I enjoyed that. But after a number of years, and I actually worked in that area as a scientist, I decided the passion for music was too strong. And I went back to college and I studied music, and I've never looked back. I never regretted it. Music has an effect on people. Some people cannot resist it, and I was one of those people. I see here more. I appreciate your willingness to share your experience with us. Well, as you can tell, I have a mission about that. Did Christian missionaries or friends help your family to navigate Christian spaces? Well, Christian missionaries were not really, I'm not sure what is meant. I think of them being more like in Asia or Africa. They weren't really missionaries in Holland. As to Christians in Holland, I have to say that was a mixed bag. There were some Christians who were very helpful and sympathetic, and there were some that just betrayed the Jews. And Jews were no not any better. I don't want to say that, and things happen there too. But and that was true in Germany too. You know, a lot of Christians went along with Hitler, who painted himself like another Jesus Christ, you know, Son of Man. And many of them opposed Hitler and suffered for it. Did you go back to your birth name or keep it on? No, yes, of course we did. Our name there was something sounded more Dutch, from Silbiger, but the moment we were, free, we went back to being, actually in Dutch it is Silbiger. In America it became Silbiger or Silbiger, either one. Should teachers go through the Holocaust Speakers Bureau to contact Lex about a possible? If you go to the Speakers Bureau, you will see actually you're asked, there's my email is there, and you're asked to contact me directly. I cannot accept every invitation, and my time is limited too, but some I can. And I also these days make personal appearances if they are in a convenient location, for instance in Durham or nearby. What are your thoughts on the Israeli conflict and the impact on Jews around the world? Well, that's a whole other question, and I've decided I don't want to talk about this here. Of course, I'm very concerned about it. I don't fully understand everything that's going on. I'm not sure if anybody knows precisely all that's going on, but I would prefer not to comment on that. Any further questions here? No, I guess that's it. Okay, thank you for those questions. They're good.
Thank you. So Lee has posted in the chat the link to the Holocaust Speakers Bureau. Again, that has Lex's email on there. Like I said, you will be getting an email from either myself or Chris or Kinsey in the coming days with the evaluation form. But before everyone goes, I do want to make sure that you get a chance to see that we do have a new North Carolina Council on the Holocaust website. It's new and improved. If you are a ELA teacher, English Language Arts, those new resources that have been created over the last year are now available for use. Each one is a set of text sets, and they are absolutely beautiful. And if I taught English, I would be all over these. I was one of the social studies team members, and I always get jealous when I look at theirs. But we have them for all the way from 6 through 12. And it has essential questions. I mean, literally anything you could need, it is there for you. We also have our upcoming workshops and webinars. We have a workshop coming up November 15th in Harnett County. So if you're within driving distance of there, Lee Holder and myself will be the team leads along with a few other people, regional directors from around the state. But this is going to be a whole day event. We do pay for your sub. There's information up here if you would like to register about substitute reimbursement. But again, our goal for this is for you to be like a one-stop shop for you. Our emails, many of our emails are up there. Oh, thank you, Jillian. Jillian said the conference was so good. We had one last week in Winston-Salem. So again, please reach out if you need resources, if you, again, need some help finding Lex's contact info, we are more than happy to help. So with that, everyone have a great evening, and we'll stay on for a few minutes in case anybody has another question. Thanks, y'all.